students who aspire to pursue global MBA, what should they realistically expect, and what aspects are overhyped or something like that?
I think the salary aspect is overhyped. Right?
Oh,
Don't go to MBA for making money. And most of the
for
people
an
think, hey,
ROI.
what are you telling me, right? Go there for the experience. Go there for the networks. Go there for the relationships. And that's what you will carry for your life. See, money is a factor that will follow when you have all of this in place. But don't go there just because, it's going to give you some better life or just because it's going to give you money. That experience that you get when you're sitting in that class is something I feel you cannot replicate anywhere. If you want to do MBA, and especially in a global college, or you want to do it outside India, you want to do it after you have spent at least 8 to 10 years in the industry. And many people will feel, hey, I don't have that sort of patience to do it, right? But if you want to extract that value out of an MBA, you want to do it at least after 7 years of actual corporate work experience.
A lot of us over here are fans of Aswath Damodaran. So wanted to know how was your experience overall NYU Stern and also learning valuation or maybe corporate finance from him.
NYU Stern, as all of you know, is the holy Makkah of finance, right? It's the ultimate grail for finance. And as you rightly said, Aswath Damodaran is the god of finance in that holy Makkah, right? And as people in Wall Street like to say, Wall Street stops and listens when Aswath Damodaran speaks.
So, guys, we'll start. Circle of Clarity is truly excited to welcome our special guest, Denis Thomas. Denis brings around 16 years of global strategy consulting experience, having worked across US, Asia, Middle East, Europe, and Africa. Today, as a global strategy head at Reddington, he sits at the intersection of growth, strategy, and high stakes decision making, helping scale businesses while maintaining sustainable, profitable growth. What makes Denis' journey especially interesting is the blend of deep technology roots and sharp business strategy. From engineering at Pune University to an MS in computer science from Lehigh University and later an MBA from NYU Stern, his path reflects both technical depth and financial thinking. He has also completed advanced executive strategy training from Harvard Business School. Beyond the corporate world, Denis is a published author, thought leader, and mentor who actively contributes to the fintech and strategy ecosystem. Today's conversation is an opportunity to go beyond theory and hear directly from someone who operates where real business decisions are made. Thank you, Dennis sir, and I hope you will also have a fun time with us today.
Same here, same here. Thank you for the kind introduction.
And guys, we'll start with a very fun discussion. Okay. First question, Dennis sir, to you is can we start from the very beginning? What did you study, from where, and how did your academic as well as professional journey went? So could you please tell us about that?
Sure, sure. So going back a few years now, right? Even before I started my computer science, I love playing video games, and I guess most of us here, love playing video games.
Yeah.
And the way the games interacted with me and how it made it tougher on each stage, sort of made me very curious. And being very frank, that was one of the initial decisions as to why I went into computer science, to understand the brain behind computers, right? So I did my engineering in IT. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I, in fact, started liking databases and search engines a lot. That took me to Lehigh University because Professor Hank Colt, one of the teachers to my database books, he did his primary research and was a professor at Lehigh University. So that brought me to Lehigh. So when I came into Lehigh, my aspirations were, to get into hardcore programming and to do AI programming, and this is back then, almost 20 years back. So at that point, I started off with my PhD and my MS combined. But after completing my MS and after getting some very interesting offers from the industry, the industry started attracting me as well, right? And after a year of PhD, I decided to quit off PhD and to join the corporate world. One of my initial journeys was with an insurance company. And being a typical software engineer and being in production, and I'm sure a lot of people will understand, you had to support the product 24/7. And within a week of doing that, I started hating my job, right? Because I used to get calls from morning 9 a.m. to evening 11 p.m. So it was paying me good, but I was not enjoying the job. And I think I stayed in that company for less than a year, and I decided to make a move into SAP, and that, I would say, was my first foray into a mix of technical and functional, or say blending the technology and business, the very first time, right? And that introduced me through SAP. That also let me travel quite a bit, so which I'm still doing. which I still like doing. And it also introduced me to a bunch of different businesses. And I ended up working with that company for a long time before I joined DLB, which was into data centers. And that's how I got into, the crux of strategy consulting. But prior to that, it gave me a lot of exposure into, how do you understand business requirements from high level stakeholders? How do you convey that into the technical developers? Because I served as a bridge in the middle as a techno functional consultant. It also gave me a lot of exposure to different areas of business, right? So what is operations? Like, for example, until that point, I understood only, programming and tech. But SAP gave me an exposure to operations, to different functions within the company, like
Hmm.
materials management, supplier relationships. For the very first time, I heard words like, suppliers and vendors and customers, right? Which I was completely unaware of. And all of that exposure also led me to an introspection in myself, right? I started realizing that while I'm hearing a lot of words, I don't understand a lot of the business side of things. And my journey into DLB was also very interesting because I was taking a flight. I still remember from New York to Florida, and the guy next to me was Mr. DLB. So the owner
Oh,
and
wow.
proprietor of DLB Associates, which is to
Correct.
like almost a $65 million company. We got chatting. He liked my profile, and he called me back to his office. His office was also in a very swanky location. So he had a very sweet office along Jersey Shore, and a very nice, backyard and all of that. So I was, being one of in fact, the second or the third job, this was very attractive to me.
Correct.
And I started off talking and meeting him and his team at 8 a.m. By 5 p.m., I had an offer that I could not refuse. And that's what
Wow.
took me into, DLB Associates. And at DLB
Correct.
Associates, I got exposed to a lot of different things, right from interacting with the big tech companies like Google, Facebook, as being one of my very big and first clients. At DLB, just to give you all sort of an introduction, DLB was a construction management company, and they were into building data centers. And today, I know the whole world understands how critical data centers are,
Correct.
right? So, from the foundations of, okay, how do you procure land, right? How do you procure power? And then how do you use technology to sort of complement the entire construction management of a data center? So that's what the company did. And in that company, I developed some very cool products. Like I used some meta tagging to understand how project stages were tracked. I developed an internal search engine to DLB. So I rose up the ranks very quickly. I joined in as a product manager, but I started heading the entire corporate research wing of DLB. But at that point too, I realized that okay, I am still lacking that sort of the business acumen that I need, and that's what pushed me to giving my GMAT and getting into MBA.
Wow.
And that was, I would say, DLB introduced me to technology consulting, but MBA sort of sharpened that aspect of understanding what marketing is, what operations is, what accounting is. And for somebody coming from engineering, accounting is very tough, right? As it comes naturally to guys like CAs and CFAs. But for
Yeah.
an engineer, while we crack problems and solve computer problems, accounting comes as a
Um,
scare to us, right? And that
True.
was one of my
True.
very first subjects at NYU. So it also gave me an eye opener as to how many different things I'm lacking in. And after MBA, I had two options essentially. Okay, when I was looking at my career, and when I look back, I could either get into investment banking or I could get into management consulting. And at that point, I always wanted to start a company. And when I did some research, I realized that okay, as management consulting, you get exposed to different clients, to different domains. So that puts me into better shoes when I'm starting a company of my own. That was my vision then. I haven't started a company yet, but that was my vision then, right?
Correct.
And that I ended up taking management consulting and starting off. So from that point until now, I've been in one function or the other function of management consulting or strategy consulting. So for the last almost 12 to 14 years, I've been in this space.
Couple of things that I understood from what you said,
Yeah.
Sarji. Don't you think US is, ahead of things, as to when you said you wanted to get into AI 20 years back? I don't think AI was a big buzzword 20 years back. Might be, I might be wrong for that. And data centers are a huge theme in India right now. Yes, but you're
Yeah.
saying you did something like this, in US so many years back. So yeah, true. What you're saying is absolutely correct. Nice segue to our second question that I wanted to ask. How was your experience at NYU Stern? A lot of us over here are fans of Aswath Damodaran. So wanted to know how was your experience overall NYU Stern and also learning valuation or maybe corporate finance from him. So yeah,
So, NYU Stern, as all of you know, is the holy Makkah of finance, right?
finance,
It's
correct,
the ultimate grail for finance. And as you rightly said, Ashwath Damodaran is the god of finance in that holy Makkah, right?
correct.
And as people in Wall Street like to say, Wall Street stops and listens when Ashwath Damodaran speaks. And that's as
Oh,
true as the statement goes, right? And when I was attending one of his first lectures, I felt, why do people sort of admire him so much? And, what is this
correct,
so much of, admiration, right? But over time, I realized, the articles that he writes, the way he conveys, and the way he sort of articulates, right? Everybody from, seasoned veterans to professors in, other universities, they all look up to him. So that's definitely a great experience. NYU Stern also, being in the heart of New York City, got me exposed to a lot of CEOs, right? Just because of the fact that we were right in the smack 2 blocks away from Wall Street, we had a lot of CEOs visiting our campus, which was not the case with the likes of Harvard or Wharton, which were far away from Wall Street. Secondly, there were a lot of professors who had very unique credentials, especially in finance. I like to start with Aswath Damodaran, who was the king in valuations and corporate finance. You had Glenn Okun, who was a lot to do with entrepreneurial finance. You had
correct,
Scott Galloway, who is like, if you see, you talk luxury marketing, you have his name everywhere from Pepsi to Coca-Cola. You had Martin Siegel, who was one amongst the first to start LTCM, who was one of the
correct.
founders of,
LDCM, correct.
you would have heard of the large
Yeah,
fund, right? And the fund, in fact, that crashed the whole of the American
yeah,
economy,
exactly.
right? So
Yeah.
he's notorious for that, but he was one among those 12 people, right? So
Okay,
NYU is filled with such brains, and when you are in that ecosystem, you get to learn a lot, you get to experience a lot. And
true.
one thing that I experienced the most in NYU was the perspective of multiple cultures and the perspective of multiple fields, right? When I was applying for the admissions, I had stupid questions like, what would I bring to the class? And, being having an engineering background, I'm like, why do they have these questions, right? I did not understand when I was applying. But when I got into the class, and in fact, my second or third case study from Harvard, where we were discussing on IKEA, the Swedish furniture company, and we
Correct,
had a bunch of questions. Right. So, me, like an engineer, tried to solve the problem. Like, okay, what's the
correct,
problem in the statement? Let me find a solution to that.
correct.
And I felt, okay, I am the best, right? So because I found the solution, right? And then we opened up these questions to the class, very soon to realize that, okay, it's not just about the solution, right?
Correct.
And when there were other grads, especially people who had done masters in history, masters in arts, somebody was into filmmaking, and when they started adding their humanity aspects, the sustainability aspects, the aspects of having history impacting business,
Hmm.
and I was like, I never thought of that. It was like
Correct.
a eureka moment. And that's when I realized, okay, why do they say you need to have a cohort which needs people from multiple branches?
Exactly.
And that was the
Yes.
most, I would say, and people say, hey, will I get the worth of my money? Hey, will I make salary? But I say, no, don't go to MBA for making money. And most of the
For
people
an
say, hey,
ROI.
what are you
Correct.
telling me, right? Go there for the experience. Go there for the networks. Go there for the relationships. And that's what you will carry for your life. See, money is a factor that will follow when you have all of this in place. But don't go there just because it's gonna give you some better life, or just because it's gonna give you money. That experience that you get when you're sitting in that class is something I feel you cannot replicate anywhere,
Correct.
right? While everybody else says that, oh, we can teach you this, we can, put you on the pedestal, we can accelerate you into the cabin much sooner. And maybe you might get there too. But that enriching experience that you have when you're interacting with people from multiple cultures, when you're interacting with people from multiple backgrounds, is
Correct.
something which is very unparalleled. In fact,
True.
I had a war veteran in my class. He came with like one eye shut. He served in one of the wars with America.
Correct.
I had a very senior surgeon who was running an established hospital in New York, which was just 2 or 3 blocks away. I'm like, you're making tons of money while you're
Exactly.
doing an MBA, right? And
Yeah.
he was there, and that each of them added a different value or a different flavor to the class.
Amazing. So for students who aspire to pursue a global MBA, what should they realistically expect, and what aspects are overhyped or something like that?
I think the salary aspect is overhyped, right?
Okay.
See, because when people go from here, they feel, oh, I'm gonna get my first package is gonna be $300,000 plus, right? But but just to give, and it's not that people don't get that, right? But the people getting that $300,000 package is maybe one or two in the class, right? And on
Okay.
very specific fields. But the bulk of the class is somewhere between 100,000 to 150,000. That's your salary bracket, right? So the salary aspect, I feel, is overhyped, right? Especially when you get into a school, like, for example, like a specialized school like NYU. By the time you graduate, you have every student, and I'm not talking about the brightest student, but every student in the class has an average of 3 to 4, offers. So he can
Hmm.
choose, what job I should go after.
Correct.
So from a placement standpoint, you have opportunities. Maybe that applies to you, maybe that does not. But
Correct.
you have plenty of options. Also,
True.
I would say along with that is a lot of people, especially when we study in India, we feel, oh, we need to do our engineering now, we need to do our MS or MBA. But MBA is a very different animal, right? And because I've done MS and MBA, I can sort of articulate between the two. MS is when you are specializing in a specific subject, right? MBA
Correct.
is when you're generalizing and trying to understand the management of a company, right?
True.
It's very different. So if you want to do MBA, and especially in a global college, or you want to do it outside India, you want to do it after you have spent at least 8 to 10 years in the industry. And many people will feel, hey, I don't have that sort of patience to do it, right? But
Correct.
if you want to extract that value out of an MBA, you want to do it at least after 7 years of actual corporate work experience. And I'll explain why.
Okay.
Because a lot of the subjects that you learn in MBA, if I take out, accounting, finance, operations, marketing, we do it. A lot of the American business schools do it on a case study perspective. A lot of
Hmm.
pointers that will come out when you are talking about a company, when you're getting into the gaps of a company, when you're trying to analyze a company, there'll be so many areas that you do not understand if you have not spent at least 5 years in the company. That's why most of the top B schools, they will say that, okay, it is advisable to have at least 5 years of experience, while they take minimum 3 years experience, but advisable to have 5 years.
5 years
And
experience.
when you go into the class, you realize that, hey, there are people who are having 8 years, 10 years. And in fact, they
Hmm.
can extract the most. And in fact,
Correct.
these people are the ones who end up, crossing that 300,000, $400,000, salary packages when you get out of MBA as well. Because you are now able to say that, okay, you have, as a manager, managed a team. You have dealt with
Hmm.
problems. You have understood what interpersonal
True.
relationships you need to deal with in the team. And then that helps you accelerate your career further. Else, MBA just turns out being another master's degree. It just does not
Master. Correct.
help you with your acceleration. So that's what
True.
I would say.